African Center for Research, for more on this developing story. Sarah, thank you for joining us on the program. Now, according to the UN report, it seems EU efforts to work with Libyan authorities to improve conditions in the detention centers have so far been ineffective. What happened to plans last year to close the centers most notorious for abuse?
First of all, hello, good evening, and thank you for having me. Well, the EU hasn't been the only player in the playground open in Libya for the past 10 years. On the contrary, the EU is the only superpower who tried to make up for what I like to call the NATO strike mistake. Even though the EU is not the only, as well, key factor in the NATO, and the EU is the biggest price payer for the Libyan crisis, especially for the topic that you mentioned, the migrants. The EU has suffered a lot of that, and it hasn't only been the only key player. Yet the US is like taking herself out of the equation and of the suffering of the EU, especially on the migration issues. And we have witnessed in the Trump administration how tension the discussions and the negotiations were when it comes to migration, discussing that with the EU counterparts of the US, and it's still as it is today.
So in your view, though, the EU is not the only key player here, but former detainees are on record as saying they felt abandoned by the international community and saw little choice but to keep trying to cross the Mediterranean to Europe, often restarting the cycle of interception, detention and abuse. Do you share the opinion, though, that the international community has abandoned the migrants?
I do actually share this opinion, and yes, migrants haven't had the necessary efforts by the international community. Unfortunately, like today, the UN report is very big evidence on that. Only today, after a decade of a crisis, a bloody crisis in Libya and in Syria, only like 2 months away or less than 2 months away from the presidential elections, we witnessed such a report. And if that says anything, it says that, yes, the international community knows for sure that there has been a humanitarian crisis in Libya, and another political analysis might go with that report is that it's trying to interfere somehow in the path of the elections next December in Libya. Maybe it's one way to say, of course, a US voice, we don't want another Haftar in the presidency of Libya. So when you take a look at the humanitarian crisis and you take a look on the political situation and the superpowers who had a hand and, of course, a big hand, or proxy wars in Libya, and everyone had his own geopolitical interest, I would agree that the international community hasn't exerted enough efforts in the past 10 years for the sake of to solve the migration crisis and migrants coming, especially from Africa to Europe. And so we all know how the conditions are.
So this whole question of the migrants going into Europe and crossing the Mediterranean Sea has been a long-standing issue. How do you see this issue being resolved?
Well, this issue regarding the EU, you mean?
I mean, regarding the migrants crossing through the Mediterranean.
Okay. As I told you, the EU is the big sufferer, the big superpower who suffered from interfering in Libya through the NATO strike. Big deal. The EU has really suffered big deal. We have seen a lot of migrants, dead children, all kinds of people and all kinds of immigrants from different crises in the region coming across the Mediterranean to where? To Europe. Europe has tried to deal with the situation, but the intensity of the crisis that hit Europe because of the crisis on the other shore of the Mediterranean and the political situation in the other shore of the Mediterranean, it has affected the domestic problems and it has affected the domestic situation in the EU. We have seen a whole rise of what's called xenophobia today, or the fear of other people and other nationalities. We have seen migrants in very bad conditions on the shores or in camps or in center areas. We are witnessing a huge humanitarian crisis because of all the problems happening on the other shore of the Mediterranean. So yes, the EU will still deal with it. And of course, we have a lot of ways. The EU has a lot of humanitarian crews helping out migrants in the Mediterranean. Yes, right. It's not enough yet. As we know, it's dealing with Egypt, who has set a very good example in making the migrants using the Egyptian borders less. Yes, that's another way. But still the political resolution of conflicts on the other shore of the Mediterranean is the only key solution for the EU to come over this crisis.
All right, Sarah Kira joining us there from Cairo with that.